At 2:30 a.m., she drank tequila alone, unaware the Mafia boss was watching her. Why was she drinking tequila alone at 2:30 a.m.? And what might happen when someone is being watched without realizing it? Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the channel. If you love emotional stories filled with unforgettable moments and unexpected turns, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new upload. Thank you so much for being here and for supporting this channel with your time, your kindness, and your encouragement. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, have you ever had a single late-night moment that changed the way you looked at life? Now, get comfortable, take a deep breath, and let this remarkable story begin from the very first moment of that unforgettable night. The loneliest people are not always the ones sitting alone. Sometimes they are the ones everyone else forgot to notice. At exactly 2:30 in the morning, the city looked like it had finally grown tired of pretending to be awake. Rain had washed the streets less than an hour earlier, leaving the pavement shimmering beneath rows of amber streetlights that stretched toward the skyline like quiet constellations. Inside Skyline 42, a rooftop lounge overlooking downtown Chicago, soft jazz drifted through the room while conversations blended into the gentle clink of crystal glasses. Couples leaned close enough to hear each other over the music. Friends laughed around polished oak tables. Bartenders moved with effortless rhythm behind shelves lined with expensive bottles that reflected the city's lights. I sat alone near the floor-to-ceiling windows, turning a small glass of tequila slowly between my fingers. It was my second drink of the night, and probably my last. I had never been the type to drink away my problems. In fact, I could not remember the last time I had ordered tequila. But life has a strange habit of making ordinary people choose unusual nights to do unusual things. 28 years old. Freelance graphic designer. Recently single. Recently disappointed. Recently wondering whether starting over was supposed to feel this exhausting. My laptop had spent more nights on my kitchen table than I had spent sleeping in my own bed during the past month. 2 clients had canceled contracts within the same week. My landlord had politely reminded me that rent was due in 4 days. My younger sister kept calling to ask if I was eating enough. I always lied and said yes. Tonight, I simply wanted one quiet hour where nobody expected anything from me. I lifted the glass and took another careful sip. The warmth settled slowly against the cold knot that had lived somewhere behind my ribs for weeks. Outside the window, headlights drifted through the wet streets below like tiny rivers of light. Somewhere behind me, someone celebrated a birthday. Another table applauded. A waiter walked past carrying sparkling desserts topped with tiny flames. The entire room seemed alive. Yet somehow I had never felt more invisible. I liked it that way. Invisible people did not have to explain themselves. They did not have to smile when they were tired or reassure everyone that everything would be fine. My phone rested face down beside the coaster. 12 missed messages. 3 voicemails. I ignored all of them. Across the rooftop, separated from the main lounge by smoked glass panels and discreet security, another gathering occupied the private terrace. The people there spoke quietly, dressed in tailored suits that looked untouched by the damp weather outside. Their laughter never rose above polite conversation. Their attention remained focused on one man seated near the edge of the terrace with a clear view of the city below. Lucas Moretti rarely looked around a room twice. Years had taught him to notice everything within seconds. Entrances, exits, faces, intentions, patterns. Tonight his attention should have remained on the discussion unfolding before him. Yet something unexpectedly drew his eyes toward the main lounge. A woman sat completely alone beside the window. No phone in her hand. No desperate scrolling. No dramatic tears. No attempt to attract attention. She simply watched the rain-soaked skyline while slowly turning a glass of tequila beneath the soft golden light. One of the men beside Lucas continued explaining financial reports, but Lucas barely heard another word. There was something quietly different about the woman. She looked like someone waiting for nothing at all. That was what unsettled him. Almost everyone in the city wanted something. Recognition, money, success, revenge, love. Yet the woman by the window looked as though she had walked into the tallest building in Chicago simply to disappear for an hour. She never once glanced toward the exclusive terrace. She never noticed the security. She never noticed the expensive watches, the luxury suits, or the man whose presence usually turned every room toward him within seconds. For the first time in years, Lucas Moretti realized someone had entered his world without even knowing he existed, and somehow, that simple fact became the only thing he could not stop thinking about. I finished my tequila slowly, more interested in the reflections dancing across the rain-streaked windows than the conversations echoing around me. The bartender glanced in my direction as he polished another glass. "Would you like another?" he asked kindly. I smiled and shook my head. "No, I think two is enough." He nodded with the quiet understanding that comes from serving people long enough to recognize when they came for peace instead of celebration. I reached for my wallet and carefully counted the bills inside. Enough to cover the drinks, the tip, and a train ride home. Barely. Freelancing had taught me to calculate every expense without letting anyone notice. I slid my credit card across the polished bar, signed the receipt, and thanked the bartender before slipping my wallet back into my purse. Around me, the rooftop lounge continued its familiar rhythm. A couple argued softly near the elevators before making up almost as quickly. A group of young professionals celebrated a promotion with loud laughter that briefly filled the room. Somewhere near the piano, someone requested an old Frank Sinatra song that blended perfectly with the city's glowing skyline. I realized something almost made me smile. Life never stopped simply because one person felt lost. It kept moving. It always would. Across the private terrace, Lucas remained unusually distracted. One of his associates noticed almost immediately. "Is something wrong?" the man asked. Lucas looked away from the window only long enough to answer. "Nothing." The response sounded convincing enough to everyone except his oldest advisor, Vincent, who had worked beside him for nearly 15 years. Vincent quietly followed Lucas's line of sight until he noticed me sitting alone near the windows. "Do you know her?" Vincent asked. "No." "Then why are you watching her?" Lucas remained silent for several seconds before answering with complete honesty. "Because she is not watching anyone." Vincent looked again toward the lounge before smiling faintly. "That is unusual." Lucas nodded almost imperceptibly. "Exactly. Most people who entered expensive places like Skyline 42 spent the evening looking around. They noticed designer clothes, luxury watches, recognizable faces, and famous names. They measured themselves against everyone else inside the room. The woman by the window had done none of that. She had arrived carrying only a small leather purse, ordered one simple drink, then another, and spent almost an hour looking out over the city instead of into the room. She behaved as though she had forgotten there were other people nearby. Lucas had built his entire adult life studying human behavior. Confidence, fear, greed, ambition. Every expression usually revealed something useful. Yet the woman remained impossible to categorize. She looked neither happy nor heartbroken, neither hopeful nor defeated, just quiet. That intrigued him more than he cared to admit. I slipped my coat over my shoulders and stood from my seat. My knees protested slightly after sitting so long, and I stretched almost absent-mindedly before glancing one last time at the city lights below. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the skyline brighter than before. I felt strangely lighter too. Not because anything had changed. Nothing had. My rent was still due. My career was still uncertain. My apartment would still be waiting exactly as I had left it. But sometimes allowing yourself one peaceful hour was enough to remember tomorrow deserved another chance. I turned toward the elevators without looking anywhere else in the lounge. As I walked away, a small silver bracelet resting loosely beneath the sleeve of my coat caught briefly against the arm of my chair. The delicate clasp loosened without my noticing. 2 more steps. The bracelet slipped silently onto the dark hardwood floor behind me. I continued toward the elevators, completely unaware that I had left behind the last gift my mother had ever given me, while only one pair of eyes in the entire room had seen it fall. The elevator doors closed behind me with a soft chime, carrying me toward the lobby while I stared at my reflection in the mirrored walls. I looked exactly the way I felt. Tired eyes. Damp hair from the rain. A woman trying very hard to convince herself that tomorrow would somehow be easier than today. When the doors opened, a cool breeze drifted through the entrance as I stepped onto the sidewalk. The city had settled into that strange hour when even downtown seemed to whisper instead of shout. A few taxis rolled past. Streetlights reflected across puddles left by the storm. I pulled my coat tighter around myself and started the 6-block walk to the nearest train station. My phone buzzed again inside my purse. This time I answered. "Hey, my younger sister. Emma said almost immediately. You are awake. I smiled despite my exhaustion. I could say the same thing to you. I was worried. I know. There was a brief silence before she asked the question she always asked. How are you really doing? I looked up at the dark skyline stretching above the buildings. I am getting there. She sighed softly. That means you are not. I laughed quietly. Maybe not yet. We talked for another few minutes about ordinary things. Her dog. My latest design project. Our father's stubborn refusal to replace his 20-year-old coffee maker. The conversation reminded me that life was still full of people who cared, even when everything else felt uncertain. By the time I reached the station, I felt calmer than I had all week. Back at Skyline 42, Lucas remained seated even after everyone else around the private terrace had begun gathering their documents. Vincent noticed immediately. We should leave, he reminded him. Lucas nodded but did not stand. His eyes rested on the empty chair beside the window where the woman had spent the last hour. Something caught the reflection of the overhead lights on the floor beside it. A thin silver bracelet lay partially hidden beneath the chair leg. Lucas walked over without saying a word and bent to pick it up. It was surprisingly delicate, small enough to belong to someone who never cared much about expensive jewelry. A tiny oval charm hung from the center, engraved with the outline of a single wildflower. When he turned it over, he noticed 4 carefully engraved words on the back. Keep choosing hope. His thumb traced the letters almost absent-mindedly. She dropped it, Vincent observed quietly. Lucas nodded. Most likely. Should I leave it with management? Lucas looked toward the elevator where Olivia had disappeared only minutes earlier. Something told him the bracelet meant more than its appearance suggested. Jewelry that carried an inscription rarely belonged to someone casually. No, he answered calmly. I will make sure it finds its owner. Vincent raised an eyebrow. You do not even know her name. Lucas slipped the bracelet carefully into the inside pocket of his coat. Then we will find out. Nearly 40 minutes later, I unlocked the door to my small apartment on the north side of the city. The familiar scent of lavender laundry detergent greeted me as I stepped inside. My apartment was hardly impressive. A second-hand couch, books stacked on the floor because I could not afford another bookshelf, framed sketches leaning against the wall waiting until I had enough money to buy proper nails. Yet it was home. I placed my purse on the kitchen counter, kicked off my shoes, and reached automatically toward my left wrist while filling a glass of water. My fingers stopped against bare skin. I froze. My bracelet was gone. My mother's bracelet. My heartbeat quickened as I searched every pocket of my coat, emptied my purse across the counter, checked the bathroom sink, even looked beneath the couch cushions, although I knew it made no sense. Nothing. I closed my eyes as memories rushed back all at once. My mother, fastening it around my wrist the morning before my college graduation. Her smile, her voice telling me that hope was something people carried, not something they waited for. I sank slowly onto the edge of my couch, whispering to the empty apartment, please, let me find it. Miles away, Lucas Moretti stood beside the window of his penthouse, looking down at the sleeping city while the small silver bracelet rested quietly in the palm of his hand, waiting for 2 strangers to cross paths once again. Sleep never came easily that night. I woke before sunrise with the uneasy feeling that something important had been left behind, even though I already knew exactly what it was. The empty space around my wrist seemed strangely heavier than the bracelet itself had ever been. I retraced every step from the previous evening in my mind while making coffee in my tiny apartment. The train station, the sidewalk, the rooftop lounge. Somewhere between those places, the last gift my mother had ever placed in my hands had disappeared. By 8 o'clock, I was already standing outside Skyline 42, hoping someone from the overnight staff might still be there. A maintenance employee unlocked the front entrance and smiled politely. Can I help you? I explained what I had lost, describing the delicate silver bracelet and the small wildflower charm engraved with the words Keep Choosing Hope. He listened carefully before asking me to wait while he checked the lost and found. 5 long minutes passed before he returned carrying a small plastic container filled with forgotten umbrellas, sunglasses, and several unmatched earrings. The bracelet was not there. I am sorry, he said sincerely. Nothing matching your description was turned in. I thanked him anyway and forced a smile before walking back onto the quiet morning sidewalk. For several blocks I tried convincing myself it was only an object. My mother would not want me grieving over jewelry. Yet every memory attached to that bracelet refused to let it become just another possession. It represented every encouraging conversation she had shared with me during difficult years. Every reminder that hope was something we chose, even when life gave us reasons to surrender it. Across the city, Lucas sat alone in his office overlooking the river. The bracelet rested on the polished walnut desk exactly where he had placed it before sunrise. He had already canceled 2 meetings without explanation, something that almost never happened. Vincent entered carrying a folder before noticing the bracelet immediately. "Still thinking about returning it?" he asked. Lucas nodded once. "Have we identified her?" Vincent opened the folder. The lounge reservation was made under the name Olivia Bennett. She paid with her own credit card. Freelance graphic designer. 28 years old. Lives on the North Side. Lucas skimmed the information without lingering on any particular detail. Nothing about the report stood out except its complete ordinariness. No scandals, no public attention, no remarkable social connections. Just someone quietly building a life one project at a time. "Do not contact her directly," Lucas said after a moment. Vincent looked surprised. "You wanted to find her." "I wanted to return something that belongs to her." He picked up the bracelet carefully, turning the engraved charm between his fingers once more. "There is a difference." Vincent smiled faintly. "Most people in your position would simply have someone deliver it." Lucas looked out toward the skyline, where morning sunlight reflected from rows of glass buildings. "Most people would not understand why this bracelet matters." Later that afternoon, I buried myself in client revisions, hoping work would distract me from the loss. My laptop balanced on the small dining table, while sketches and color samples covered nearly every available surface. Around 3 o'clock, my phone rang. The caller identification displayed an unfamiliar downtown number. I almost ignored it before curiosity won. "Hello." A calm professional voice answered. "Good afternoon. May I speak with Olivia Bennett?" "This is Olivia. My name is Rebecca. I am calling from Skyline 42 regarding an item you reported missing this morning. We believe someone may have found something that belongs to you. If you have time tomorrow afternoon, we would be happy to arrange for you to stop by." I closed my eyes in relief so quickly I almost laughed. "Yes," I answered without hesitation. "I will be there." After the call ended, I stood quietly beside the window of my apartment, looking out across the city with the first genuine smile I had worn in days, completely unaware that the person waiting to return my bracelet had never intended for a simple act of honesty to become the beginning of something neither of us could yet imagine. The following afternoon arrived more slowly than I expected. I finished a client presentation early, packed my laptop into my worn leather messenger bag, and took the train downtown with the strange mixture of hope and nervousness that usually accompanied important moments. Every few minutes my fingers instinctively reached toward my bare wrist before remembering why I was there. The city bustled with its usual weekday energy as office workers hurried along crowded sidewalks, carrying coffee cups and briefcases. Skyline 42 looked completely different in daylight. The building's glass exterior reflected bright blue skies instead of midnight rain, making it appear almost welcoming. I stepped inside and approached the reception desk, where a smiling hostess greeted me immediately. "Good afternoon. How may I help you?" "I received a call about a bracelet that may have been found here." She nodded as though expecting me. "Of course, Miss Bennett. Please give me just one moment." She quietly spoke into a headset before turning back toward me. "Someone will be with you shortly." I thanked her and waited beside the tall windows overlooking the city. A few guests wandered through the lobby while staff prepared the restaurant for the evening. Everything felt calm, elegant, and surprisingly ordinary. Less than a minute later, I heard measured footsteps approaching across the polished marble floor. I turned expecting another employee carrying a small jewelry box. Instead, I found myself looking directly into familiar green eyes. For a brief second, neither of us spoke. Then recognition settled between us. He was the man I vaguely remembered seeing only in passing that rainy night, although I had barely looked at him then. Today, standing only a few feet away, I noticed details I had completely missed before. His dark navy suit fit perfectly without appearing flashy. His expression remained composed, yet there was a quiet warmth behind his eyes that softened his otherwise serious features. "Miss Bennett," he said politely. "Thank you for coming." I blinked, surprised. "You are the one who found it." He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and carefully removed a small velvet pouch. Without unnecessary ceremony, he opened it and placed my silver bracelet gently into my hand. Relief washed over me so suddenly that I forgot every prepared sentence. I traced the tiny wildflower charm with trembling fingers before smiling up at him. "I cannot thank you enough." "You do not need to thank me," he replied. "It belongs to you." I looked down at the bracelet once more before fastening it securely around my wrist. The familiar weight felt comforting, almost like hearing my mother's voice again after a long silence. Most people would have turned it over to the lost and found, I admitted. "You kept it safe." He smiled faintly. "Something told me it was important." I laughed softly. "That obvious?" His eyes rested briefly on the engraved charm. People rarely engrave hope onto something they do not treasure. His answer caught me off guard. It was observant without feeling intrusive. "It was my mother's," I explained quietly. "She gave it to me before she passed away." For the first time since our conversation began, genuine emotion flickered across his face. "Then I am very glad it found its way back." There was an easy silence that followed, comfortable rather than awkward. Finally, I extended my hand. I never introduced myself properly. "I am Olivia." He accepted the handshake with the same calm confidence. "Lucas." Nothing more. No titles. No explanation. Just Lucas. Somehow that felt enough. Before leaving, I smiled gratefully. "May I buy you a cup of coffee someday to thank you?" He looked almost amused by the unexpected offer before answering. "I believe coffee lasts longer than tequila." I laughed, surprised he remembered. "Then coffee it is." As I walked back toward the elevators wearing my bracelet once again, I could not shake the feeling that returning for a lost piece of jewelry had somehow left me carrying something far more unexpected than what I had originally come to retrieve. 2 days later, I found myself standing outside a small neighborhood coffee shop tucked between an independent bookstore and an old flower shop on a quiet corner of downtown. It was the kind of place where people actually read paper books instead of staring at laptops all afternoon, where handwritten chalkboards announced the daily pastries, and where the smell of fresh espresso drifted onto the sidewalk every time someone opened the door. I had almost canceled 3 separate times that morning. Meeting a stranger for coffee was not something I usually did, especially after the difficult year I had just survived. But every time I looked at the silver bracelet resting comfortably around my wrist, I remembered Lucas's careful honesty. That counted for something. I stepped inside and immediately spotted him sitting near the front window with 2 untouched coffee cups already waiting on the table. He stood as I approached, offering the same calm smile I remembered from Skyline 42. "I hope I guessed correctly," he said. "Black coffee. No sugar." I looked at him with genuine surprise before laughing softly. "How did you know?" He shrugged almost casually. "The bartender told me you declined dessert and ordered plain sparkling water after your second drink. People usually keep the same habits." I smiled as I took my seat. "You notice a lot." "Occupational habit," he answered simply. The conversation drifted naturally after that. We spoke about ordinary things instead of impressive ones. I told him about spending endless nights designing logos for small businesses that often paid late, but dreamed big. He admitted he spent most of his time managing family investments and business operations, careful never to mention exactly what those businesses were. Somehow his answer sounded believable enough that I never questioned it. Outside, sunlight filtered through young spring leaves while pedestrians hurried past carrying shopping bags and bicycles. Inside, time seemed to slow comfortably between warm coffee and easy conversation. "Why Skyline 42?" Lucas asked after a while. I smiled thoughtfully into my cup. "Because nobody knew me there. Sometimes it is easier to be surrounded by strangers than people who keep asking whether you are all right." He nodded quietly. "And were you?" I looked out the window before answering honestly. "Not that night." Silence settled gently between us, but unlike uncomfortable silence, this one carried understanding instead of pressure. After a moment I asked, "What about you?" He smiled faintly. "What about me? Why were you there?" His eyes lingered on the coffee cup in front of him. "Business dinner." Then, after a brief pause, he added, "I stayed longer than I planned." I laughed. "The food was that good?" He looked directly at me for the first time since the question. "No." The single word hung quietly between us before he changed the subject with practiced ease. We spent another hour discussing favorite books, old family traditions, road trips, terrible apartment landlords, and the best pizza in Chicago. The longer we talked, the less he resembled the intimidating businessman I had imagined. He listened more than he spoke. He remembered small details. He never interrupted. When we finally stood to leave, I realized something unexpected. I had smiled more during those 90 minutes than I had during the previous 3 months combined. Outside the cafe, we paused beneath the bright afternoon sky. "Thank you for the coffee," I said sincerely. Lucas shook his head with quiet amusement. "You offered to buy it." I laughed. "Then thank you for accepting." As we walked in opposite directions along the busy sidewalk, neither of us noticed the business magazine displayed in the bookstore window behind us. Across the glossy front cover, beneath the headline naming Chicago's most influential entrepreneurs, was a full-page photograph of Lucas Moretti, dressed in the same composed expression he wore every day, waiting for the moment when two carefully separated worlds would finally collide. I spent the next week wondering why one simple conversation kept replaying in my mind. It was never anything dramatic. No grand promises. No flirtation. No attempt to impress me. Just coffee, honest conversation, and a man who somehow listened as though every sentence mattered. Life, however, refused to slow down simply because my thoughts had become unexpectedly complicated. Client deadlines piled higher across my dining table, while my inbox filled with revision requests that always seemed to arrive after midnight. By Thursday afternoon, I desperately needed a break from staring at a computer screen. I closed my laptop and walked toward the neighborhood bookstore beside the same coffee shop where Lucas and I had met. The familiar bell above the entrance chimed softly as I stepped inside. I wandered through the aisles without searching for anything specific, running my fingers across worn book spines until a display near the front window caught my attention. A magazine featuring Chicago's business leaders rested on a wooden stand. Something about the photograph looked strangely familiar. I picked it up absent-mindedly, then froze. Lucas stared back at me from the glossy cover wearing the same composed expression I had seen across the coffee table only days earlier. The headline described him as one of the city's most influential business figures, praising his strategic leadership, private investment empire, and remarkable ability to stay out of the public spotlight despite extraordinary influence. I blinked several times before reading the article again. It never mentioned organized crime or anything remotely illegal. Instead, it painted the portrait of a reserved businessman whose companies quietly shaped real estate, hospitality, logistics, and international investments throughout the city. I stood there for nearly 5 minutes trying to connect the man described on those pages with the person who had remembered how I drank my coffee and carefully protected a bracelet belonging to my mother. They somehow felt like two completely different people. I returned the magazine to its display and continued browsing, but my thoughts refused to settle. Later that evening, my phone vibrated with a text message from Lucas. "I hope your latest project is going well." The message was simple, polite, and somehow perfectly timed. I smiled before typing back. Better now that the client finally stopped changing the color palette every hour. A few seconds later, my phone buzzed again. "Then I believe congratulations are in order." I laughed quietly to myself inside my apartment. Whoever this man really was, he possessed a surprisingly dry sense of humor. Over the following days, our conversations remained infrequent but thoughtful. Sometimes we exchanged photographs of unusual architecture around the city. Sometimes we debated favorite novels or argued playfully about whether deep dish pizza deserved its legendary reputation. Nothing about our messages felt forced. They simply appeared whenever one of us found something worth sharing. Meanwhile, inside a quiet conference room overlooking the Chicago River, Vincent placed another folder on Lucas's desk before the morning meeting began. "Your schedule is becoming difficult to explain," he observed carefully. Lucas looked up from reviewing financial reports. "In what way?" Vincent smiled knowingly. "You have rearranged 3 meetings this month for coffee shops, bookstores, and neighborhood streets that never appeared on your calendar before." Lucas leaned back in his chair without denying it. "Perhaps I needed different scenery." Vincent laughed softly. "Or perhaps you finally met someone who does not know how important everyone else thinks you are." Lucas looked toward the skyline beyond the windows, remembering the woman who had spent nearly an hour watching city lights instead of people. "That may be exactly why I enjoy talking to her." Neither man noticed the news broadcast playing silently on the television mounted inside the conference room. A scrolling headline announced an upcoming charity gala celebrating Chicago's largest community arts foundation. Olivia Bennett's newest branding campaign had just been selected as the featured visual identity for the event, setting the stage for another unexpected crossing of paths neither of us could possibly predict. The invitation arrived on a quiet Tuesday morning while I was answering emails with a mug of reheated coffee balanced beside my keyboard. The Community Arts Foundation had approved the visual identity I designed for its annual charity gala and wanted me to attend the event as one of the featured creative partners. I read the message 3 times before believing it. Opportunities like this rarely found freelance designers who spent more time worrying about invoices than industry recognition. I accepted the invitation almost immediately, then returned to work with a smile that stayed with me for the rest of the afternoon. The evening of the gala arrived beneath a sky painted with soft shades of gold and blue. I borrowed a simple navy dress from my sister, fastened my silver bracelet securely around my wrist, and reminded myself that I belonged there just as much as anyone else. The ballroom overlooked the Chicago River, glowing beneath elegant chandeliers while a string quartet filled the room with gentle music. Guests greeted one another with practiced confidence, discussing business, philanthropy, and future projects over sparkling water and carefully prepared appetizers. I quietly admired the banners displaying my artwork near the entrance before stepping farther into the reception hall. Everything felt beautiful, yet strangely unfamiliar. I still preferred neighborhood coffee shops over luxury venues, but I promised myself I would enjoy the experience instead of feeling intimidated by it. Across the room, Lucas arrived through a private entrance reserved for major sponsors. Several organizers immediately approached to thank him for supporting the foundation year after year. He accepted every compliment politely before scanning the ballroom almost instinctively. His eyes found me within seconds. I stood near one of the display panels explaining my design choices to a small group of volunteers, smiling with the same quiet confidence he remembered from the coffee shop. For a brief moment, the conversations around him faded into the background. Vincent noticed the subtle change immediately. "You were right," he said with a knowing smile. "Different scenery." Lucas almost laughed. Apparently. A few minutes later, I excused myself from the volunteers and turned toward the refreshment table, nearly stopping in surprise when I found Lucas standing there holding 2 glasses of sparkling water. "I had a feeling tonight called for something different than tequila," he said with an easy smile. I laughed softly as I accepted one of the glasses. "I think you made the right choice." We wandered toward the balcony overlooking the river where the city lights shimmered across the calm water below. The evening breeze carried the scent of spring blossoms from nearby planters, while distant traffic hummed like a quiet heartbeat beneath the skyline. "Congratulations," Lucas said. "Your work deserves to be here." I looked at the banners through the glass doors behind us. "Thank you. It still feels unreal." "Why?" he asked. I considered the question before answering honestly. "Because I spent so many months wondering whether anyone would ever notice what I created." Lucas looked toward the artwork, then back at me. "The right people noticed." His words were simple, yet they carried enough sincerity that I believed them. Before I could respond, 2 guests stepped onto the balcony speaking in hushed voices, unaware that we could hear them. One of them glanced toward Lucas and lowered his voice even further. "That is Moretti," he whispered. "People say he controls half the city without ever raising his voice." The other nodded respectfully. "I have heard even bigger stories." Their conversation drifted away as they continued down the balcony. I slowly turned toward Lucas, searching his calm expression for an explanation. He did not interrupt the silence or rush to defend himself. Instead, he met my eyes steadily, as though he had always known this moment would eventually arrive. The evening air remained cool as the sounds of the gala drifted quietly behind us. I looked at Lucas for what felt like a very long time before finally speaking. Should I believe what they said? My voice was calm, not accusing, simply searching for the truth. Lucas rested his hands lightly against the balcony railing, his eyes following the reflections dancing across the river below. "You should believe that people often build stories around things they do not understand," he answered. It was not a denial. It was not an admission either. I appreciated that more than I expected. He could have offered rehearsed explanations or impressive speeches, but instead he chose honesty where certainty was impossible. I told you I manage family businesses, he continued quietly. That part was true. I also told you I stayed longer at Skyline 42 because of someone sitting by the window. That was true as well. I smiled faintly despite myself. You left out a few important details. His expression softened. I did. Silence settled comfortably between us once again. Strange as it seemed, learning that Lucas carried influence far beyond what I had imagined did not erase the man who had carefully returned my mother's bracelet or remembered how I drank my coffee. Those moments had happened before I knew anything else about him, and they remained real. When I first saw your photograph in that magazine, I admitted, I wondered if I had imagined our conversations. Lucas slowly shook his head. Those conversations were probably the most ordinary part of my life. I looked toward the ballroom where guests continued laughing beneath sparkling chandeliers. People seem intimidated by you. Many are. I was not. A quiet smile appeared on his face. That is exactly what caught my attention. We both laughed softly. It was the kind of laughter that arrived only after uncertainty had finally begun to fade. Before either of us spoke again, the master of ceremonies invited everyone back inside for the foundation's closing presentation. As guests gathered near the stage, the executive director thanked volunteers, artists, sponsors, and donors whose generosity had made the event possible. My name appeared briefly on the large screen beside the artwork I had created, drawing warm applause from the audience. I felt my cheeks grow warm with surprise. Then another announcement followed. The foundation revealed plans to establish a year-round design scholarship for students from underserved neighborhoods, funded by an anonymous family whose only request was that creativity always be given an opportunity to grow. The audience applauded once more. I glanced toward Lucas. He simply smiled without saying a word. He did not seek recognition. He never even looked toward the stage after the announcement. Weeks turned into months, and our lives continued moving forward, sometimes together, sometimes apart, but always with the same quiet honesty that had begun with one forgotten bracelet and one unexpected conversation. Lucas never asked me to become someone different, and I never asked him to pretend his responsibilities did not exist. Instead, we discovered that trust grows one truthful moment at a time. Nearly a year later, I returned to Skyline 42 on another rainy evening. I chose the same seat beside the window where I had once believed nobody noticed me. This time I ordered only sparkling water. A familiar voice behind me said, I thought coffee had officially replaced tequila. I turned to find Lucas smiling as he placed 2 warm cups on the table. Only on ordinary nights, I answered. Outside, the city lights shimmered across rain-soaked streets exactly as they had before, but everything felt different. I looked down at the silver bracelet resting around my wrist and gently touched the tiny engraved words my mother had chosen so long ago. Keep choosing hope. I finally understood what she meant. Hope was never about waiting for life to change. It was about remaining open to the people and moments we never planned for. Sometimes destiny does not arrive with loud promises or perfect timing. Sometimes it simply notices the person sitting quietly by the window, chooses the empty chair beside them, and stays.